This video is episode 2 of our comparison series featuring the new Volkswagen Amarok up against its cousin, the T6.2 Ford Ranger. And today's episode focuses on the two off-roading specials. Chasing cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. Next to me is the all-new Amarok PanAmericana, as close as the Volkswagen Amarok range gets to having a dedicated off-road trim. In future, we could see something special from Walkinshaw out here in Australia, but for now, the PanAmericana is as rugged as the new Amarok gets. And you can tell that from looking at it. Not only is this one painted in a suitable shade of bronze, but it's also wearing Goodyear's Wrangler Territory all-terrain tires with more of a knobbly tread, but it's sitting at basically the same ride height as the regular Amarok four-wheel drive, which all Amarok grades in Australia currently are. And in the Ford camp, we have the Ranger Wildtrak. Both of these vehicles equipped with a 3-litre diesel V6 engine. Now, in the last few years, we've started to see the Wildtrak as kind of a premium label from Ford, but really this name got its start at being a model line that was better equipped for off-roading duty. So we're actually wearing exactly the same Goodyear all-terrain tires as the Amarok PanAmericana, but you can pick a Wildtrak out on the road from its extended roof bars that head right on down to the tray of this vehicle, and also the metallic dark grey highlights around the ute. Not only does this episode give us an opportunity to get these utes off-road, but it also shows us the new Amarok and Ranger at their very closest price-wise. The PanAmericana is just over $82,000 drive away here in Australia, and the only option for it is the paint, whereas the Ranger Wildtrak is already relatively premium, but this one is just over $81,000 drive away, or $82,000 as it sits in Luxe yellow paint, because this particular ute also has the Wildtrak premium pack. So no doubt about it, these two variants are close to the apex of their ranges, but you can spend more. The Amarok is available in Aventura trim with the choice of the V6 diesel or a 2.3-litre turbo petrol 4-cylinder, whereas the Ranger, of course, takes in the Raptor at the peak of its range with a 3-litre twin-turbo petrol V6 engine. Outside, I think you'd agree with me that the appearance of these two utes is remarkably different. That's partially because the two design teams actually never met up on the Ranger and Amarok project. They never saw each other's work, and so we've got two utes that have emerged looking really different despite sharing a bunch of hard points and various elements of that toolkit that they use underneath both vehicles. But inside, those differences continue, and you can really choose between one ute which is a little bit more workmanlike, a little bit more rugged, and one that is certainly more luxuriously themed inside. And we are sitting in the former here in the Ford Ranger. Now, this is a Wildtrak, so it's certainly not skimping on equipment and it's not skimping on finishings, but it just doesn't hit the same level of plushness as the interior of an Amarok, and I don't think it's trying to, but it is fascinating here, particularly when these two specifications are so close in price, 1% different price between these two utes. So what are we dealing with in the Ranger Wildtrak? Well, the interior is fundamentally similar to the Ranger Sport from our last comparison against the Amarok style, in that we are sitting on the same seat, in that the shape of the seat is the same, but the covering is a little bit nicer, and you also get orange detailing and Wildtrak written on it, so it looks a bit cooler. But unfortunately, we're still stuck with only 8-way electric adjustment over here, so no under thigh angle adjustment, which is crazy, because if you have longer legs like me, then the tops of your legs are just sort of floating around. The Amarok is so superior in that it has a more comfortable seat generally, but it also has that additional level of adjustment there for longer drives, which is really nice. Steering wheel, love the orange stitching in here as well. It's a clear and functional wheel, totally different steering wheel to the Volkswagen, and your indicator is also on the Australian side if you prefer that. Looking further ahead, even though this Wildtrak is optioned with the premium package, which does give you some cool stuff like really great matrix LED headlights, they're causing quite a delay on orders of new Wildtraks, by the way. Bang & Olufsen stereo, which is cool. You are still stuck with a small 8-inch instrument cluster. Now, it works perfectly fine, but it's just noticeably small when you see the full 12-inch version that's fitted to the Amarok, but we do get the big 12-inch vertical touchscreen over here on the Ranger, which works well. Clearly, wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, built-in navigation. That stereo sounds really good too, plus we have physical climate controls, easier to use on the move than the Amarok's touchscreen for sure. Fit and finish, pretty nice, mostly plush, but you know, it's a little more workmanlike, a little bit more pragmatic than the Volkswagen. But we get some open storage here, decent sized cup holders, wireless charging, bin between the seats. It's all present, it's all accounted for. For a mainstream ute, it's definitely on the nice end. Under the skin, these two utes make use of the T6.2 toolkit. Now, it is originally a Ford platform, and sometime around 5-6 years ago, Volkswagen joined the collaboration program with Ford when it became clear that they weren't going to produce a second generation Amarok in-house. And if you'd like my full explanation of why that decision was made and the consequences that it had, please watch the first episode in this comparison series where we pitted the Amarok style against the Ranger Sport, where I talk for about 2.5 minutes about the nature of that partnership. But it wasn't the case that Volkswagen came in and said, let us rebrand the Ranger as the Amarok. Instead, both brands have used a common chassis and some common elements in order to produce a couple of very different interpretations, especially to drive. At least that was our big takeaway from the Amarok style versus Ranger Sport video. But I think you'll agree that here in the cabin, the two design teams have come up with remarkably different results. Now, it's obvious that they've had to put certain things in certain places. The hard points of the utes are the same, and a lot of the technology is common, but the way that they've been designed and integrated is way different from one ute to the next. So here in the Amarok, we've got a cabin which is far more about plushness and jumping up into that luxury space than it is about this being a rugged workhorse. Now, the PanAmericana is the most rugged of the Amarok specs, but here in the cabin, it's actually more about being a premium ute than it is about kind of work boots and working hard, if I might say so myself. That being said, there's a level of durability here, including in the leather seats, which are the same shape of seat as you get in the Amarok style and the Amarok Aventura. It's a beautiful seat, completely unique to Volkswagen and considerably more comfortable and supportive than the seats in the Ranger. But the PanAmericana gets its own upholstery called Cricket. It's kind of like a larger grain leather. You'll be able to wipe these down easy, but the combo of black and brown leather looks fantastic. You've also got light brown stitching. It just feels a cut above in here. Not sponsored by Volkswagen, not paid, not marketing. I think if you test drive these two utes, which I would encourage, you'd notice the interior is quite a bit nicer in the Volkswagen. That also extends to the faux leather on the dash, on the doors. It all has a very much like SUV-esque image in here, and I like that personally, can you tell? Now, moving on to the technology, we have the same 12-inch vertical touchscreen as the Ranger Wildtrak, wireless Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, nav, but it's wearing a Volkswagen skin. Now, I can tell that it's still Ford's sync system with a heavy rebrand, but hey, at least they've made the effort, and the system itself works well. But in the Amarok, we also get bigger gauges, a 12-inch instrument pack here, which in the Ranger lineup is reserved for the Raptor only, and also the new Platinum as well, which we haven't seen yet on the channel. But it really does look like a set of Volkswagen gauges. Plus, we've got a Volkswagen steering wheel, not the same wheel as the Ranger. We've got hard buttons, love that. Indicators on the European side, not everyone will want that. In terms of storage, we've got the upstairs and downstairs glove boxes. A bit of extra storage here compared to the Ford, but no auxiliary switches on the roof like you get in the Wildtrak. Smaller bin between the seats, but bigger cup holders, wireless charging, okay sized door bins. It's a nicely equipped ute, and the PanAmericana gets a Harman Kardon premium stereo as standard. It gets matrix LED headlights as standard. Those are both options on the Ranger Wildtrak. The main difference in the back seats of these utes is actually the seat upholstery, because the Amarok and the Ranger, they get the same upholstery as you get up front. So here in the Amarok PanAmericana, you still get that nice cricket leather. The seat backrest, it's more upright than what you'll find in an SUV for sure, but not as bad as some other utes out there. And the amount of space is definitely better than the old Amarok, but it's also better than the old Ranger because the wheelbase is a bit longer in the new Ranger compared to the old one. So both of these utes have a decent amount of backseat space. You'll get an adult back here. Headroom is acceptable. Legroom is okay. Tow room is okay. Still not super spacious. Going for a large SUV, even some mid-size SUVs has more space than this, but both get air vents, 12-volt socket, and the Amarok does have an extra little trick up its sleeve in that it's got a few extra little pockets added to the top of the back of the seat. That's something that Volkswagen's crossovers have. Moving around the back of the Ranger now, I think it's a handsome looking ute. It builds on the aesthetic of the previous gen Ranger that does share a number of the fundamentals of this platform, but quite different dimensions and hard points. But we have a pretty handsome tailgate here, Ranger stamping. You'll pick your Wildtrak and four-wheel drive badging. You actually don't get a V6 badge around here, so if you care about bragging rights, well, the V6 badge on the back of the Amarok, I guess, is doing a better job than this one. Now, this particular Ranger has been optioned with the accessory towing package. That's actually standard on every Amarok that's coming into Australia, which is quite interesting. Now, lowering the tailgate here, as I've just demonstrated, it's not really damped, and neither is that on the Volkswagen. That's one area where these kinds of more agricultural utes in that sort of Southeast Asian theme really lag behind bigger American utes in terms of little refinements like that. But we've got the tub liner here. It's a nice square box. Euro pallet between the arches was one of Volkswagen's requirements for this project, so the Ford also gets that. 12-volt socket in the tray, not a household power point, which would be nice. Neither of these utes have that, but what the Ranger does have that the Volkswagen doesn't in this company is a power tonneau cover. Now you can get that, sorry, I should say it's standard fitment on the Amarok Aventura, but the Ranger Wildtrak also picks that up here. This car's got almost 20,000 Ks, but that's still working really well. One other thing which I love about the tray of the Ranger is you do have these modular mounting points for accessories, but if you opt for the Wildtrak, you don't get them running down the side, because instead of that, you get these fixed bars, which of course you can tie stuff and mount them to, and I think they look pretty handsome as well. And how could I move on without naming my favorite Ranger Easter egg, which is the integrated step here on the tub. I noticed a few comments on our previous Ranger Amarok comparison of the style and sport. A few people said, why didn't Amarok do the step? The reason for that is Volkswagen never saw the step. Remember what I said before about how the design teams didn't copy each other's homework? Well, that was one of the consequences. By contrast to the top spec Amarok Aventura, which has quite a bit of aluminium and chrome, the PanAmericana is a much more blacked out aesthetic. It's got these matte dark grey wheels, lots of black sticker work, including the PanAmericana sticker on the side, and also this sports bar, which differs quite a lot to the treatment of the rear end of the Amarok. Also differing though is all of the stamping for the tray, and this is where this collaboration in one way goes quite a lot further than a bunch of other ute collaborations. Usually you'll get a unique stamping on the actual tailgate, but if you take a look at the side profiles of these utes, it's clear that the Volkswagen has squared off wheel arches, because it's kind of meant to look like the first gen Amarok, whereas the Ranger has rounded wheel arches, so there's a lot of customization in the actual stamping process of these two vehicles. Now, coming around to that tailgate, it says Amarok. That is reassuring. You get a 4Motion badge and also that V6 badge as well. Now, as I mentioned, towing kit is standard on all Amaroks coming into the country. Lowering this tailgate here, probably the same tailgate under the skin as the one in the Ranger. It feels the same. We again have a box liner here. Very, very similar tray, slightly different because of those stamping differences, but the width again will accommodate that Euro pallet back here. In terms of accessories back here though, that's where the Amarok falls a little shorter in this comparison. No 12-volt socket here in the tray, and we also don't have that power tonneau cover on this particular vehicle, but you can get it on the Aventura. Plus, you don't get those little modular inset ports on the top of the tray itself to add Ford's range of accessories, because those don't really work with the Amarok, at least not most of them. Volkswagen has its own range of accessories for the Amarok, which we're going to be checking out in a future video here on the channel. When it comes to running costs, these two utes are really similar, exactly the same finding as in our first comparison episode of this pair, where we focused on the style and sport grades. Starting with insurance, in the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer spent $1,251 to comprehensively insure either a new Ford Ranger or new Volkswagen Amarok. Everybody's situation varies, and your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live, your driving history, and how you garage the car. On the servicing front, both vehicles do have capped price servicing plans. However, Ford has a very attractive offer for its first 4 years, where Volkswagen's most attractive offer covers 5 years. Now, with the Amarok, you do have to buy the servicing plan up front with the purchase of the ute to get the best price, and that's $1,800 for the first 5 years and 75,000 Ks of scheduled maintenance. With the Ford, you don't buy the plan up front, you pay as you go, $329 per service for each of the first 4 years, and then a bit more expensive for that 5th service. The pricing is on screen now. In terms of fuel consumption, both of the utes on test today have the diesel V6. In fact, with the PanAmericana version of the Amarok, the diesel V6 is the only engine you can get. However, Ford does let you choose a more fuel efficient 2-litre 4-cylinder diesel with the Wildtrak. But even then, there's not much in it, because the 6-cylinder diesel is really economical in these utes. On the highway, you'll get anywhere from about 7.5 to 8 litres per 100 Ks as tested by us here at Chasing Cars. In town, if you're moderate on the throttle, you'll see 10 litres per 100 Ks. If you're a bit more assertive, you'll see 12 litres per 100 Ks. For the size and weight of these vehicles, that's quite all right. But it is important to know that you can't get anything like a hybrid or electric version of the Amarok or Ranger, but we know that Ford and Volkswagen are working on both of those right now. So our last comparison of these two utes was of the style and the sport, and we did that on our Car of the Year testing roads in the ACT. But today we're in the Blue Mountains, west of Sydney. We've driven up here on some awesome roads, and I've been enjoying the PanAmericana's suspension, which is actually making use of a Volkswagen specific suspension hardware. And that's shared with the Aventura, and Volkswagen Australia decided that they wanted to opt for this specific damper for these two models, basically to give them better body control on road, and that has worked. And it's actually a surprisingly nice pairing with the 18-inch wheels on the Aventura, because you've got that degree of ride comfort, but you've also got quite a disciplined body, and that's not actually a mix that you can get super easily on the Ranger. You kind of can with the Raptor on its expensive Fox suspension, but in terms of the Amarok, I think the PanAmericana's probably got the best blend of wheel size and suspension hardware and tune. So really like this combination. Take it for a test drive, see what you think. But we are now out on sort of moderately difficult track following a set of power lines, and with this comparison we're really trying to concentrate on the sort of stuff that you would actually do. There'll be other channels that grab one of these cars and do like a torture test to destruction, and that's awesome. But on Chasing Cars, we tend to look at like what is someone actually going to do with their 80 grand plus on-road cost ute. And when it comes to the Wildtrak with the Ford and the PanAmericana in the Amarok, I think this is exactly what you're going to do. You're going to commute, you're going to do some weekend road trips, and if those road trips see you encountering some moderate off-roading without anything that's going to like seriously endanger the value of your asset, then yeah, it's got to be able to do that stuff. And these two utes are really good at all of those disciplines. It's just that the Amarok is slightly better, well, measurably better, I would actually say, at the on-road part of that. But off-road, they are very similar in terms of capability and effectively identical in terms of their dimensions and basic measurements. So in terms of our angles here, which is relevant as I approach a dip and then quite a significant climb, we've got a 30-degree approach angle, a 25-degree breakover angle, and 22-degree departure angle, which would be a lot worse if this Amarok was fitted with the tow bar like the Ford is today. You do get that with the Amarok, but it's just not fitted on this particular vehicle. So we're a little bit easier in terms of our ascents here in the Volkswagen just by virtue of that. Ground clearance is very decent for both cars, 235 millimeters, and the wading depth is also attractive at 800 millimeters, which is right up there. So, you know, they are going to get the job done. And of course, you can take it further with accessories and with aftermarket parts. Of course, you could lift it even further if you wanted to. You could go for even more aggressive tires, but for what we've been doing today, the Goodyear All-Terrains that are OEM fitted to both utes have gotten the job done. Bit scrabbly on some of the rock crawling, you would expect that, but they're not too loud on the road, and the grip levels on the road are also relatively decent. So in that sort of perspective, they're quite a nice, appropriate compromise tire for a sort of quasi off-roading specification. Like these two utes. Now the suspension still has quite a lot of give and compliance and softness for off-roading, which is great because you know, we're getting a few hits here, and in the cabin we're largely calm and comfortable, particularly so in the Volkswagen in this sort of leather-lined cabin. It's slightly uncanny that we're able to do as much as we can while also sitting here in sort of luxury and quietness and comfort, listening to the Harman Kardon stereo, and I kind of like it. It's sort of a nice experience, and it's also worth remembering that like you'd have to pay a lot more than this in order to replicate this sort of luxury off-roading capability with something a little bit more purpose-built in the SUV space, like a Land Rover Defender or you know, that kind of thing. Volkswagen's own Touareg is actually surprisingly capable for this kind of work, but the Amarok sort of will sit in a class of its own within the Volkswagen hierarchy. So Amarok PanAmericana, surprisingly good on road, really well matched suspension, tune and wheel size. Very capable off-road for this kind of moderate trail work. We've had no problems. Let's swap over the Ranger Wildtrak and see how we fare over there. Of course, in this comparison, the Ford Ranger is the donor of the engine used by these vehicles. There's no two ways about it. That the 3-litre V6 turbo diesel engine used on the T6.2 platform in the Amarok, Ranger, Everest, other vehicles that might come out on this platform, is the Ford engine. Originally it was the Lion V6, that was like 20 years ago. This engine's had so many updates and changes, some pretty fundamental changes actually in that time, that to still call it the Lion V6 might be a little bit misleading, but that's where it comes from. Originally a Ford PSA development actually. And you know what? In its 2023 form, this is a really nice engine. There's less lag for one, it's a bit quieter, it's less peaky, and the numbers are good. 184 kilowatts of power, and 600 Newton meters of torque, which just makes for effortless performance on and off the trail in both of these utes. Virtually identical performance. Amarok is a touch heavier, doesn't really make a difference. We've clocked the Ranger V6 at a 7.7 second 0 to 100 time, and about a 43 meter emergency stop from 100 to 0, which are reasonable, respectable numbers, especially the 0 to 100. If you want to go much faster than this in terms of utes, you will need a Ranger Raptor or possibly the 2.3 turbo in the Amarok, which is optional in the Aventura, although we haven't performance tested that car yet. Now, interestingly, in the Wildtrak, Ford does let you go for the 2-litre 4-cylinder diesel with 154 kilowatts and 500 Newton meters. You save a tiny bit of petrol, it saves some cost, and you know what, that's still a really good engine too, partially because it now plays quite nicely to the extensively retuned and upgraded 10-speed torque converter automatic, which is the default transmission in the Ranger and the Amarok. There are some base models which have a different automatic, and you can even get a Ranger manual in the base model, but these particular cars have the 10-speed auto, and it works well. Where the differences start to emerge is not only in terms of the styling and the interior design, but also in the suspension hardware between these two utes on test, and the steering tune. So the PanAmericana, because of Volkswagen Australia's product planning, basically has the same suspension hardware as the Aventura, which are entirely different dampers to what's being used here in the Ranger Wildtrak. And you can absolutely tell, mostly on road, where I think the Amarok strikes a slightly superior balance of compliance and control. But off-road, an interesting way that the difference becomes evident is that there's actually less bobbing on the suspension after you encounter an obstacle. In the Volkswagen, it tends to absorb the impact through the suspension and settle with only sort of one response from the spring, whereas there's a little bit more softness, a little bit more bobbing characteristic in the Ranger Wildtrak. Nothing really to write home about. I wouldn't even put it in the negative column for this car. It's just that you notice that the additional softness in the suspension of the Ford, which some people will indeed prefer on-road, makes it a little bit more bobby off-road as well. But this car has heaps of articulation capability, those same bona fides in terms of off-roading capabilities and measurements as the Volkswagen, and it's just so easy to drive off-road, partially because of the 4-auto mode for the 4-wheel drive system, which really takes the guesswork out of it. Visibility is pretty good. The 360-degree camera really helps when you're having to maneuver yourself out of a bit of a tight spot on or off-road. It's nice and crisp and clear, and both of the vehicles on test have that. And of course, we've got some pretty sophisticated off-roading pages in the technology showing angle, lean, roll, and you also get that stuff for towing too, which is good. Refinement's impressive. They're pretty quiet even under load. And in terms of safety, not so relevant here, but on-road at higher speed, you're benefiting from AEB, reversing AEB, lane keeping assist, although that could be quite a lot stronger, and adaptive cruise control, which does actually work quite well. So that's my comparison of the Amarok PanAmericana and the Ford Ranger Wildtrak. So which one of these utes, which have some mechanical similarities, but so much differentiation in execution and tuning, and even some hardware, which one is best for a task like this, which is to be a ute that you can drive every day, have some comfort because you are spending big on these models, but then be able to tackle moderate trails like the ones we've taken on? Well, for me, it's the Volkswagen Amarok PanAmericana. Why? Well, the capabilities of these utes are so similar, and they are similar to drive at low speeds on trails like this. But the Amarok is a little elevated in terms of its on-road driving demeanor, thanks to that Volkswagen specific suspension hardware and tune that this vehicle is running. But given that the prices are so close to identical between these specs, the elevated, almost luxury grade interior of the Volkswagen is going to be able to win so many people over. That being said, we're really basically talking about the prom king and queen of dual cab utes here. Neither of these vehicles is a bad ute. They are a class above most of their rivals. And speaking of a class above, if what you want is ultimate performance and pace off the blacktop, you're probably going to want a Ranger Raptor. But between this pair, by some margin, it's the Volkswagen that takes the gong for me. But I want to know your opinion, so please spar with me down below in the comments. Let me know what you're thinking. While you're there, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more content like this, hit the notification bell, and as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.